Many people have started to notice a change in the structure of the society we live in. Things that used to be scandalous have become perfectly normal. It is said that we must leave the past behind or else be called retrograde and rigid, and that we must accept, even by force, the doctrine that everything new is better, even if it means denying who we are and the giants whose shoulders we have stood on to get where we are. Furthermore, cinema, television, music, etc. are desperate to present the same message, that we must give free rein to our instincts, no matter how basic they are. Now I am the center of the universe and nothing is more important than my feelings, not even reality. Everything revolves around what each person wants. Beauty has disappeared from art and architecture. Objective truth is offensive and must therefore be ignored. What used to be good before is bad now, and what was bad before now is good. Obviously, this did not happen overnight. We didn't wake up one day to find that biology had expired in the morning and we had to take the children to the Satanic school club in the afternoon. Man put himself as the measure of all things and ironically had never been so unhappy, never felt so alone. Similarly, now that we have unlimited access to unlimited information, we have become the dumbest version of man in history. I think the question is, how did this happen? Clearly, there is not a single cause or author of this phenomenon. However, there was a person who had a great deal of influence on the social transformation that, powerless, we are witnessing today. Edward Alexander Crowley, better known as Aleister Crowley, was born on October 12, 1875 in Royal Leamington Spa, Warwickshire, England, into a wealthy and strict evangelical family. At the age of 11, he lost his father, which seemed to be the origin of his rebellion against his family and his father's teachings. In some way, he became obsessed with the idea of the supreme sin, and displayed disturbing and deviant behavior from a very early age. For example, at the age of 14, seeking to prove the veracity of the belief that cats have 9 lives, he poisoned a neighborhood cat, subjected it to all kinds of violent outrages, and finally threw it out the window. He recounted all of this in his book, Confessions, of 1929, claiming that it was in the best interest of science. In his adolescence, he cultivated his mind with philosophy and poetry while degrading his body with both women and men. It was around this time that he began to take an interest in esotericism and adopted the name Aleister. He abandoned his studies in 1898, obsessed with the idea of finding hidden knowledge. Later, he joined the Secret Order of the Golden Dawn, founded in 1889 by 333rd-degree Masons, to which notable personalities of the time belonged, such as Dracula writer Bram Stoker, poet W.B. Yeats, Sherlock Holmes creator Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and others. The Golden Dawn's initial purpose was the study and practice of Kabbalah, an ancient Hebrew method of esoteric study of consciousness and the cosmos. As above, so below, is one of its maxims, meaning, as the universe, so the soul. To reach high levels of consciousness, those who practice Kabbalah study sacred geometry and numerology, known as gematria. Combining these Eastern practices with Western Gnosticism and magic, members of the Golden Dawn invoked spiritual entities with the supposed aim of perfecting the individual. Crowley was actually a prodigious student of these occult disciplines and began calling himself the Beast 666. However, Crowley soon became disappointed with his fellow practitioners because he thought they did not go far enough. Nevertheless, he continued to investigate occult sciences, including white and black magic and the invocation of angels and demons. It was through this exploration that he discovered the Abramelin ritual, a special ritual of demonic invocation that required certain special parameters, and determined to execute it. In 1899 he purchased the infamous Bullskine House, on the shores of Loch Ness in Scotland, as the ritual needed to be performed in an isolated house with a terrace and whose doors faced north. The ritual required 18 months of preparation so that the magician could supposedly contact his guardian angel, not without first subjugating and binding the 12 Dukes of Hell to rid himself of their negative influence. In the end, Crowley hoped to obtain the gifts of invisibility, hypnosis, and wealth. While performing the ritual, Crowley was called to Paris by the leaders of the Golden Dawn, which was disintegrating at the time. Because of this, he interrupted the ceremony, something that was definitely not supposed to happen as he ran the risk of being possessed by the entities he was invoking. Without finishing the ritual, Crowley dedicated himself completely to black magic. He traveled to India to learn yoga incorporating the use of heavy drugs, to Mexico where he performed carnal rituals to become invisible, and to Africa with his first follower, Newberg, with whom they invoked the devil himself under a name that I will not mention here or anywhere else. From that moment on, Crowley considered carnal relations essential for every ritual. By the way, Newberg never fully recovered from this experience. Upon returning to England, he met the sister of the famous English court painter Sir Gerald Kelly, Rose Edith Kelly, whom he married in 1904. As their honeymoon destination, Crowley chose Egypt where they led a decadent and lavish lifestyle. There, he introduced Rose to the use of drugs he had encountered in Latin America. After some time living in Cairo, Crowley took Rose to the Great Pyramid of Giza to perform a ritual that also sought the invocation of his guardian angel, proclaiming his own divinity before several Egyptian gods such as Lilith and Ra, while also employing hallucinogenic substances rich in DMT. While performing the ritual, Crowley style, Rose began to mumble, saying that the gods wanted to talk to him. Especially the god Horus had something to say to him. Crowley initially ignored her, but upon Rose's insistence, he asked her questions that he was surprised she could answer. Back in Cairo, during a visit to a museum, he was surprised to find the effigy of Horus marked under the number 666. After several rituals to invoke this Egyptian deity, on April 7, 1904, with the help of Rose, Crowley finally contacted what he believed was his guardian angel. He heard a voice speaking to him over his left shoulder, and for 3 days at exactly the same time, the entity dictated to him the Book of the Law, which would become the Bible of his new religion. This book said that Jesus had left his throne and had been replaced, but its main principle, what it really sought to teach, was, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." In other words, humans would have the right to live their lives according to their own discretion without guidance or limits imposed by religion or morality. This was the principle of his new religious movement, the Lima, a Greek word meaning will. Later, he joined the Freemasons, whom he used as a vehicle to spread Thelema. In 1913, he wrote the Gnostic Mass, in which he introduced the hermaphroditic demonic entity known as Baphomet. From every point of view, this ritual must be considered sacrilegious and demonic, and it gave rise to all kinds of satanic rituals, each more degenerate than the last, pushing the imagination to the limits of horror. Having gained a large number of followers, Crowley founded his Abbey of Thelema in Sicily, Italy. In 1923, one of his followers, Oxford student Raoul Loveday, died in the abbey due to dysentery, which was the result of the rituals they underwent there. We leave it to you to find out what the main cause of dysentery is. After this, Benito Mussolini himself took charge of closing the abbey and expelling Crowley's group from Italy. It was during this time that Crowley gained the reputation of being the wickedest man in the world. Later, Crowley traveled to the United States, protected by his position as a Freemason, and gave lectures there, settling in California where he founded a lodge which included actor John Carradine, Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard, and the enigmatic NASA scientist Jack Parsons. In 1926, he returned to Paris, but by this time he had squandered his family inheritance and the number of his followers had decreased considerably. In 1932, he returned to England to never leave again. Apparently, his attempts to create a new religion had failed and he spent his last years in poverty, addicted to heavy drugs, and with a reprehensible reputation that reached almost all continents. At this point, many of you must be wondering why you have been exposed to the biography of such a reprehensible subject. Crowley, quite deservedly, died believing that his teachings and the religion he had founded had been forgotten. I wish he had been right. The truth is that since his death in 1947, Crowley has become an icon of rebellion. English bands, co-founders of what would later become our pop culture like the Rolling Stones, David Bowie, the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, and especially Jimmy Page, have been influenced by his alleged message of freedom. It is said that Crowley influenced figures from Adolf Hitler to Timothy Leary, an American writer who introduced the concept of static technologies to refer to popular drugs of the 60s that he helped popularize, especially LSD. The Beatles wrote their song, "Come Together," to campaign for Leary's presidential campaign, which fortunately never took off. Crowley's followers today see him as a prophet who helped sow the seeds of a society that adopted ideas of carnal and spiritual freedom while willingly forgetting the despicable things he did. Anyway, we may not see Crowley, but there he is, shouting to the four winds the phrase he preached as long as he could breathe. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And just to leave no one in doubt, let's take a look at the different ways his devastating influence has reached us to this day.
Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, and love is the law, love under will.
Do what thou wilt.
Do what thou wilt.
Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Love is the law. Love is the only law.
I'm me. I'm doing what I want to do.
I am who I am, and it's tattooed on my chest.
Well, I've been an admirer of Aleister Crowley. I think that I'm carrying on much of the work that he started over 100 years ago, and I think the 60s themselves. You know, Crowley said, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Do what thou wilt.
One of the musical genres that has been influenced by Crowley is the very popular rock. Crowley was known for his fondness for rock music, and some of the most influential musicians in the genre have cited his work as an inspiration for their work. For example, Jimmy Page, guitarist of Led Zeppelin, was a declared admirer of Crowley and bought his former home in Scotland, known as Boleskine House. Remember the Ritual House in Scotland? Page also used an adapted version of Crowley's Abrahadabra seal, inscription on Led Zeppelin's fourth album. Another musician who has been influenced by Crowley is the British singer and songwriter David Bowie. Bowie was an admirer of Crowley's work and used some of his ideas in his music and public image.
Just the Crowleyism of, the times. It was a significant part of that middle point of the set. Just the Crowleyism.
For example, on his 1976 album, Station to Station, Bowie referred to himself as the Thin White Duke, a term coined by Crowley to refer to one of his own magical characters. Another musical genre that has been influenced by Crowley is heavy metal. Heavy metal music and lyrics often deal with dark and controversial themes, and some of the most influential musicians in the genre have cited Crowley's work as an influence on their work. For example, the American thrash metal band Slayer used Crowley's Avenue Satanas inscription on their album, Hell Awaits, while the British band Iron Maiden included a song called The Number of the Beast, a reference to the number of the beast mentioned in Crowley's book, the Book of Revelation. One of the earliest indications of Crowley's influence on the Beatles can be found on the cover of the album Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. The band can be seen in the middle of figures that, according to them, influenced the Beatles, and the image includes an effigy of Crowley. In addition to these examples, it has been speculated that the Beatles members were interested in magic and spirituality, central themes in Crowley's work. In particular, it is believed that George Harrison was interested in Crowley's philosophy and used some of his concepts in his own spiritual exploration. In hip-hop music, rapper Jay-Z has referenced Crowley's philosophy on several occasions and has stated that the phrase, "do what thou wilt," inspired him to pursue his dream of becoming a successful musician. In addition, Crowley's philosophy has been adopted by some pop music and showbiz culture artists such as Madonna and Lady Gaga, who have influenced millions of young people in the last decades. We could continue to analyze the influence of this nefarious character in all the arts, psychology, and politics. The truth is that his message is not only openly anti-Christian but also unequivocally satanic, and we can observe that "do what thou wilt" is about to repeal the "love thy neighbor as yourself" that defined the West until not long ago. To conclude, I would like to point out a parallel between Crowley's life and our modern society, which, having Christian roots, rebels against God and seeks to fill the void that he leaves with something else. We seek unbridled carnality, narcotics, and pleasure without restraint, only to end up in a decadent and honestly disastrous state. Unlike Crowley, it is time to stop doing what we want, leave behind libertinism and Satan with his pomps and false promises, and turn our gaze to Christ. It is time to return to the Catholic Church and heed her message of surrender and sacrifice. Otherwise, we are already lost.